Hello and welcome to Protect It University. The following is our HIPAA workforce training and must be completed by all workforce members that come into contact with Protected Health Information, or PHI. We have 4 main objectives with this training. First, our goal is to make you familiar with HIPAA and its requirements. Next, we want to help you understand the basic compliance obligations with both the HIPAA privacy and security rules. Then, we will educate you on how to protect PHI. And finally, we'll inform you on how and where to report a breach. Let's get started. So what is HIPAA? It stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it's a federal law that addresses numerous healthcare issues. HIPAA was signed into law by President Clinton in 1996, and it contains the privacy and security rules, which are both designed to protect sensitive information known as Protected Health Information, or PHI. HIPAA also includes the HITECH Act, which stands for the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act of 2009. The HITECH Act expanded HIPAA's coverage to include electronic information and required breach notification rules. Now, let's talk about some key HIPAA terms you should know and understand. The first is PHI, which I've already mentioned. But what is it? PHI is any health information that can be used to identify an individual, which relates to that individual's past, present, or future physical or mental health or condition. PHI is also the provision of health care to an individual or the past, present, or future payment for the provision of health care to an individual which identifies the individual, or for which there is reasonable basis to believe can be used to identify an individual. I know, that's a long definition, but I think you'll get a better understanding for what PHI is if we discuss some specific examples. So PHI can be found in many different places, but what does it include? PHI can be a name, address, telephone or fax number, email address, social security number, a medical record number, a health plan beneficiary number, a financial account, a credit card number, driver's license number, vehicle license plate number, a medical device serial number, an IP address, any biometric identifiers like fingerprints or voice recordings. PHI can be dates related to an individual like date of birth or date of death. It's also a person's photo or any other unique identifying number, characteristic, or code. Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about PHI, and it's obviously important. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some other key terms we need to define, such as use. Use is, with respect to individually identifiable health information, the sharing, employment, application, utilization, examination, or analysis of that information within an entity that maintains it. The next term, disclose, is defined as to release or divulge information by an entity to persons or organizations outside of that entity. Next, authorization, which is the mechanism for obtaining consent from a patient for the use and disclosure of health information for a purpose that is not for treatment, payment, or for healthcare operations. The final term, minimum necessary, is defined as when using any PHI, a covered entity or business associate must generally make reasonable efforts to limit itself to the minimum necessary to accomplish the intended purpose of the use, disclosure, or request. Now, let's talk about who is covered by HIPAA. Covered entities, health plans, healthcare clearinghouses, business associates, and subcontractors of business associates are all covered. Examples of covered entities are doctors, clinics, hospitals, dentists, nursing homes, and pharmacies that transmit data electronically. Business associates are any business or organization that functions on behalf of a covered entity that involves the use or disclosure of identifiable health information. For example, IT companies that service healthcare clients, data warehouse companies, or billing companies are all examples of business associates. Subcontractors, defined as any business or organization working for a business associate and performing a covered function on behalf of the business associate. An example of a subcontractor is a data backup service set up by an IT company for the IT company's own customer. A significant change with HIPAA took place with the establishment of the Omnibus Final Rule, which went into effect on March 26, 2013. This rule modified the HIPAA privacy, security, and enforcement rules to implement statutory requirements of the HITECH Act. One of the most significant changes established that all covered entities, business associates, and subcontractors must meet the same HIPAA compliance requirements that covered entities do, and all parties now share the same downstream liability. It is now more important than ever to ensure that all downstream business associates and subcontractors are compliant and accountable to all upstream parties. The Privacy Rule. What is it? The Privacy Rule protects an individual's right to the privacy and confidentiality of individually identifiable health information. How does the Privacy Rule protect PHI? It limits the use and disclosure, and almost all of which requires the individual to authorize that use or disclosure. The Privacy Rule also outlines the permitted uses and disclosures defined as the release of information to the individual or personal representative for purposes related to treatment, payment, and healthcare operations. Lastly, the Privacy Rule outlines use and disclosure to public interests such as required by law, law enforcement purposes, public health activities, serious threat to health or safety, or workers' compensations investigations. The rule does apply to all information in all forms, written, spoken, and electronic. So, within the Privacy Rule, how can PHI be used? First, it can be used only as specifically authorized by the patient or the representative of the patient. In addition, information can be used for the purposes of performing job duties such as a nurse or medical office personnel. All use and disclosure must follow the minimum necessary amount of information. This means only use or disclose the absolute minimum necessary information and no more. Not allowed use or disclosure. What is not allowed by the Privacy Rule? For example, accessing PHI just for curiosity is not allowed. Use or disclosure for personal use or for purposes outside of a workforce member's job responsibility is not allowed. And use or disclosure of PHI in violation of a company's own HIPAA policies is also not allowed. Any use or disclosures of PHI that is not allowed is a serious offense and should be treated as such. The Security Rule. The Security Rule establishes safeguards for protected health information by focusing on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of PHI created, received, maintained, or transmitted electronically. The rule protects against any reasonable threats or hazards to the security or integrity of PHI. The rule also protects against any reasonably anticipated uses or disclosures of PHI that are not permitted and is meant to prevent unauthorized use or disclosure. Certain guidelines and rules exist for protecting PHI, and the following are examples. When protecting PHI, a user should never access any PHI using an unsecured wireless network. And if a workforce member is working on an unsecured wireless network, encryption technology is required to transmit PHI. Always utilize strong passwords, change passwords frequently, and never share your user password with anyone. Access to computer systems and information should be limited and only granted based on the workforce member's defined work responsibilities. Access should immediately be revoked if and when an employee is terminated. PHI should not be left unattended, specifically overnight, without being secured, and all PHI leaving the company's premises should be secured and/or encrypted as appropriate. Finally, always use secure email when sending PHI to others, and log files should be retained and audited to assess whether access to PHI is appropriate and permitted within your organization. Maintaining privacy and security is not only required, but it is necessary when establishing a culture of compliance within your organization. All written PHI should be kept in a folder during business hours and stored in a locked area after hours. Written PHI should also be shredded after use. Only a minimal amount of information in a hard copy format should be included if a retained copy is needed. And never leave documents containing PHI unattended, for example, at a printer or a copy machine. All faxes containing PHI should always include a cover sheet, and the cover sheet should state that the following fax is a confidential document. It should also give a contact and number to call if the fax is received in error. The cover sheet must spell out the HIPAA language, and the sender should always verify the fax number before sending all faxes. All emails containing PHI must be sent in a secure and approved manner and should follow the required protocol for secured email as outlined in company policies. And never enter any PHI in the subject line of an email. Workstations, common areas, and vehicles that contain PHI must always be locked, and any access to computers containing PHI must be locked with a password. Any PHI must be removed after use as quickly as possible from devices such as copiers and printers. Always keep physical documents containing PHI in a folder or upside down during work hours, and all PHI should be removed from workspaces or vehicles and placed in a locked drawer or secure area at the end of the workday. It is also required that workforce members never discuss PHI in public areas. The following outlines each workforce member's individual responsibilities. Every workforce member must protect the privacy and security of sensitive information and comply with your own organization's HIPAA policies, and must only access or disclose PHI when such access is part of their job responsibilities. Employees are required to promptly report to a privacy officer or a supervisor any loss or misuse of PHI. Never store PHI on mobile devices or portable media without prior authorization, and always keep portable devices, for example a laptop, physically secure to prevent theft and unauthorized access. It is recommended that all PHI stored on portable devices should be encrypted. A workforce member must never look at PHI just out of curiosity, and must protect PHI from accidental or intentional unauthorized use or disclosure in computer systems and work areas. Limit accidental disclosures and never disclose work-related sensitive information through social media. Security protocols such as document shredding, locked doors and file storage areas, and the use of passwords and codes for access to PHI must be implemented at all times. A workforce member may never discuss PHI in public areas or leave PHI out in the open, and is required to always verify telephone numbers before faxing, using pre-programmed telephone numbers whenever possible. The inappropriate access, use, or disclosure of PHI is a serious offense and will result in disciplinary action and/or possible other penalties. So why is HIPAA compliance important? It is important because all parties may now be held accountable for a breach or violation. Since the Omnibus Final Rule went into effect, every entity in a downstream chain, such as from a covered entity to a business associate, like an IT service firm, down to subcontractors a business associate contracts with to service a covered entity, all may be held liable and responsible. Lack of compliance can be costly, both in terms of penalties and liability from breach of contractual arrangements. Breaches are considered a significant event within HIPAA. A breach is defined as unauthorized acquisition, access, use, or disclosure of PHI that compromises the privacy or security of the PHI. An example is when PHI is lost, stolen, or improperly disposed. A breach is also when unauthorized persons or mechanized programs hack into the systems containing PHI, or when systems are compromised through a worm or virus. A breach is also if PHI is communicated or sent to others who have no official need to receive it, such as through gossip about information learned from a medical record. What do you do if there is a breach? First, you must immediately report any breach to a privacy officer, security officer, or a direct supervisor. Your privacy officer will determine the next actions. Such steps as notifying all affected individuals following the discovery no later than 60 days after the discovery is required. If a breach affects more than 500 residents of a state or jurisdiction, prominent media outlets serving the state or jurisdiction, and the Office of Civil Rights. Any data breach of PHI is significant and can have a negative impact on the individuals affected as well as the reputation of all the entities involved. Consequences for a violation of HIPAA can be in the form of civil money penalties and criminal penalties. Civil penalties, which are imposed by the Department of Health and Human Services on a covered entity, a business associate or subcontractor, of $100 per failure to comply with a privacy rule requirement. That penalty may not exceed $50,000 per year for multiple violations of the identical privacy rule requirement in a calendar year. HHS may not impose a civil money penalty under specific circumstances, such as when a violation is due to a reasonable cause and did not involve willful neglect, and if the covered entity corrected the violation within 30 days of when it knew or should have known of the violation. Criminal penalties are imposed when a person who knowingly obtains or discloses individually identifiable health information in violation of HIPAA faces a fine of $50,000 and up to 1 year imprisonment. The criminal penalties increase to $100,000 and up to 5 years imprisonment if the wrongful conduct involves false pretenses, and increases to $250,000 and up to 10 years imprisonment if the wrongful conduct involves the intent to sell, transfer, or use individually identifiable health information for commercial advantage, personal gain, or malicious harm. Criminal sanctions are enforced by the Department of Justice. Congratulations! You've completed your workforce training. Just have a few questions to answer and you're all done.